au bado hawajatosheka. Now, but let me take the opportunity to welcome you to this Azimio meeting. As the leader of minority of Azimio in Parliament has already said, this is an important occasion today when we want to unveil our position as Azimio on this issue of the finance bill. I want to first take the opportunity and the privilege to introduce the Azimio Economic Council. Azimio Economic Council is led by Honorable Governor Nderitu Murithi. There. You have Deputy Governor Caroline Karugu. We have Honorable John Mbadi, who is also chairman of ODM, and we have former PS Torome Saitoti. Torome. There are other members who are not there today, but we have a council that consists of 7 members. They have looked at this bill very extensively, and after I've made my remarks today, they are going to make a brief presentation to you to enforce what I'm going to say. Now we say that next week, the Kenya Kwanza regime will present the highlights of its inaugural budget and revenue-raising measures to the National Assembly. As usual, it seeks to amend laws relating to various taxes and duties, such as the Income Tax Act, Value-Added Tax, the VAT Act, Tax Procedures Act, and Excise Duty Act, while proposing new taxes, regulations, and incentives. Today, we lay out our final objection to the revenue-raising measures contained in the Financial Bill 2023. We also give final instructions to our members of Parliament, after which, depending on how the Ruto administration behaves, this matter may take a very different turn. Celebrated African writer Chinua Achebe said, and I quote, "A disease that has never been seen before cannot be cured with everyday herbs." In the history of budget making in Kenya, no regime has imposed so many and so high taxes on our people in return for nothing except fantasies and fairy tales. This bill is a disease that cannot be cured with everyday herbs. This bill is economic sabotage. If Ruto insists on this bill, this country will go into full recession. This bill requires and must get fierce resistance. No Senate leader withdraws subsidies on basic goods, then increases taxes on the same goods and salaries of working people, including hawkers. You withdraw subsidies, and then you now add taxes to add insult to injury. I will highlight areas of significant concern to us. Then let the Azimio Economic Council take the country through the details. Ruto wants to levy taxes on chama or merry-go-rounds. Merry-go-rounds are the bankers and lenders of last resort for our mothers and youth, particularly in rural areas and slums. Without offering any services to the chamas, women groups and trade associations, Ruto has decided they must pay taxes. This strikes at the heart of women's economy. It kills savings and spreads poverty among an already vulnerable group. At a time, the National Hospital Insurance Fund and the National Social Security Fund are failing. Ruto is telling Kenyans to forego 3% of their salaries and deposit it into some fantasy called housing levy. Nobody knows where it is housed. The government cannot agree whether it is a tax or an investment. Nobody knows how government became an investment advisor to Kenyans. They ignore concerns by employers and employees that many pay lip services. That many pay slips are already overwhelmed by deductions, loans, and lack of pay rise. They ignore concerns that this tax will increase business operating costs and force farms to relocate. Already some farms are relocating merely because of the high cost of energy in this country. It is cheaper to manufacture in Egypt and export back to Kenya. Look at the arrogance with which they want to raise turnover tax for businesses from the current 1% to 3%. They are targeting small businesses by reducing turnover of taxable businesses from Kenya shillings 1 million to 500,000. With this, any small business that sells goods and services worth 1,370 daily will pay a turnover tax of 15,000 per year, regardless of whether the business makes a profit or not. That sounds like a memo on how to kill businesses and the economy. Nobody now knows where the bottom-up economy went. The mamamboga, the boda-boda, the juakali, the hustlers. Contrast that decision to increase taxes for small businesses and merry-go-rounds with Ruto's plan to scrap VAT on aircrafts and helicopters. A benefit that should be extended to small businesses is being extended to the rich who trade aircrafts. This is not bottom-up, this is top-bottom. Ruto promised to respect every job and its contribution to the economy. This does not look like respect for every job. The bill exposes a clear disconnect between Ruto's fantasy and the experiences of ordinary people. Hard-working people, like youth seeking to make a living as content creators and social media influencers for fun, fame, and money, are being slapped with a punitive 15% withholding tax. Ruto wants to impose a 316% tax hike on beauty products such as wigs, false beards, eyelashes, human hair, and artificial nails among others. The beauty industry is a major employer, particularly of our women and girls who have been unable to find work elsewhere. Millions of young men and women eke a living out of saloons, spas, and barbershops. Those businesses face closure. Others will have to sack employees. Ruto and Kenya Kwanza are behaving as if cost of living is no longer a crisis in this country. Despite existing high prices, Ruto wants to impose 16% VAT on maize flour, cassava flour, and wheat flour. It gets worse when we factor in the proposal to expose agricultural pest control products, transportation of sugarcane, raw materials for fertilizer manufacturing, and fertilizers to VAT. The net effect is that costs rise again. From his fantasy world, Ruto wants to double the VAT on fuel from 8% to 16%. Palm prices will increase by 9 shillings per litre of diesel and 10 shillings per litre of petrol. The cost of goods, bus fare, and production will immediately rise again. Healthcare has impoverished millions of Kenyans. But Ruto wants to expose pharmaceuticals and medicaments to taxation by removing them from the zero-rated to tax-exempt list, targeted at the price of lifelong medication like insulin and those for chronic illnesses like diabetes and hypertension. After raising the cost of fuel, they want to raise advance tax on motor vehicles. Advance tax on passenger vehicles will increase from the current Kenya shillings 2,400 to at least Kenya shillings 5,000, and from 3,000 to at least 5,000 for commercial vehicles. Trucks will now pay at least 60,000 shillings annually, up from 20,000 shillings. Obviously, the cost will be passed to the consumer, making matatu and taxi transportation more unaffordable. And woe unto you if that vehicle ends up in an accident. Ruto wants to treat insurance compensation as income and introduce a 16% VAT on it. Insurance compensation will no longer be seen as compensation of what was lost. My car had an accident. The insurance company sends an assessor, assesses the extent of damage, which most of the times is under assessment. I'm paid compensation to go and repair my car. I have to pay a tax on that compensation. This I don't know what kind of arithmetic it is. It is the same story with per diems, mileage and travel allowance of public officers. Per diem will now be treated as an income and attract a 30% income tax. I used to be a civil servant, and per diems are based on the costs of living in the country you are traveling to. That's why it differed from Tokyo, Oslo, New York, Accra, Cairo, and so on. And whatever you did not use, you are required to retire on return. Now it is an income that you must pay 30% on. You could go on, and it will be tax after tax. Looking at the proposals, one cannot help asking, what planet does Ruto live on? Does he understand what Kenyans are going through? Let me turn briefly to the question of how did we find ourselves here? The official lie is that Kenya Kwanza inherited a broke country. The truth is, the cash crunch has been caused by economic mismanagement, wasteful spending, corruption, and the hiring of incompetent personnel. This worsening economic situation has been manufactured in State House and the office of the President in the last 8 or so months. Government's own data indicates that contrary to what Ruto promised and what he is saying, borrowing has gone up instead of coming down. But strangely, the cash crunch continues. In September 2022, when Uhuru Kenyatta officially handed over to Ruto, Kenya's total debt was 8.701 trillion. I repeat, 8.701 trillion. Of this, 4.33 trillion was external debt, while 4.366 was domestic debt. As at March 2023, to 4.539 in March 2023. We can go further back to the year 2021. Between September 2021 to March 2022, that a comparable period, our debt rose by 405 billion, from 7.96 trillion to 8.401 trillion. External debt was at 4.209 trillion, while domestic debt stood at 4.192 trillion. This was the time Kenya was struggling with the impacts of COVID-19, including implementation of subsidies and the emerging war in Ukraine. But our total debt was still lower than what Ruto has incurred in 6 months' time. Kenya Kwanza has borrowed more than any other regime. They have removed subsidies, raised taxes, but the cash crunch has continued. They cannot pay salaries. They cannot disburse money to schools. They cannot disburse money to counties. They cannot disburse money to the elderly. They cannot finance the National Hospital Insurance Fund. And nearly all major infrastructure projects have stalled. Where is the money going? It is being stolen and being spent on wrong priorities to massage Ruto's ego. And that is not all. Quietly, Ruto is trying to change the country's debt ceiling from the current absolute number of Kenya shilling 10 trillion to a moving number of 55% of GDP. And right now they are trying to bring an amendment in Parliament that will remove the parliamentary authority to sanction increase of debt. The debt level is already 60% of the GDP. To beat that violation of the law, Ruto wants to force an amendment to the Public Finance Act to allow the National Treasury and not Parliament to set new debt ceiling. Which is why we are calling on Kenyans to reject excess taxation to finance wasteful expenditure. It is urgent that we bring Ruto back to earth because he lives on another planet. As this bill heads to the National Assembly, we must remind Ruto that excessive taxation is stifling growth. We must tell Ruto that when people have to park cars at home because of cost of fuel, it is bad for the economy. You must tell him that when Kenyans postpone traveling up country because they can't afford fuel or fare, it is bad for the economy. You must tell him that when people choose to stay indoors because they want to spend less on expensive goods, it is bad for the economy. And you must tell him that these things are happening now, here in this country. Rather than burden Kenyans, we want Ruto to undertake the following. 1. Stop duplication of county roles and responsibilities. In the proposed bill, budget for health is growing by 35 billion shillings at the national level, yet health is a devolved function. 2. Adopt a zero-based budgeting. Don't take the previous budget as the baseline. Every budget must start at ground zero, where everything has to be justified. 3. Don't grow the size of the budget. Cut it down and live within your means. 4. Instead of imposing new taxes, see the loopholes that lead to the loss of revenue. 5. Stop non-essential government expenditures, including the appointment of the chief administrative secretaries. 6. Reduce the size of government. 7. Cut non-essential domestic and international travel. 8. Freeze ministerial out-of-station allowances, ministerial house allowances, and domestic allowances for cabinet and principal secretaries. 9. Stop corruption and theft of public funds. 10. Finally, we ask Ruto to humble himself, withdraw this bill, offer apology, and seek forgiveness from Kenyans for the anxiety caused then, and begin afresh. The one point I wanted to mention, that the budget for the parliament is 41 billion shillings. That of the judiciary is 23 billion shillings. But the budget for housing, which is talking about as his flagship project, is 29 billion. Parliament, with only 400 or so many members, it allocated 43 billion shillings for members to be globe-trotting around. Yet housing, which is saying is fundamental to his budget, is only allocating 29 billion shillings, less than what is given to members of parliament, almost equal to what is given to the judiciary. Is economics upside down. You have noted that the regime has run out of sound bites and explanations for these proposals and has resorted to threats. But we have agreed with our MPs on what to do. vote against any tax rises. Should Ruto overrun the National Assembly, we will regroup and overrun him in the wider National Assembly of the whole people of Kenya. End of statement.